my colleagues, before we get the base motion, let's turn it over to staff. They want to make a brief presentation to us.
Yes, thank you. Brent Lloyd with the LDC team, and Anik and Peter also have some brief comments to make. We're here today as professional staff to assist you in considering the second reading draft code and related comprehensive plan amendments, as well as the next steps moving forward towards third reading. Throughout your deliberations over the next few days, we'll be prepared to answer questions about Council's proposed amendments that have been posted. And if an amendment is consistent with your existing direction and presents no significant challenges, staff will register our agreement. If we believe an amendment basically meets that test, but should be approached a bit differently or requires a further review, we'll be neutral. Only if an amendment presents intractable significant challenges or legal issues will staff be recommending against it. We're here to help Council move forward and to claim this code as your own and to find the right balance among all the LDC's different policy priorities. With that, let's briefly summarize the items that are before you before turning our attention to the next steps.
Anik Baudet, Land Development Code Revision Team. Number one on your agenda is a proposed amendment to the Imagine Austin Comprehensive Plan Growth Concept Map and related text. These amendments seek to implement missing middle housing types as a growth concept applicable citywide. As such, it includes a description of corridor-based transition areas and broad criteria for locating missing middle throughout the city. To this end, the proposed amendments establish a new land use designation that supersedes future land use maps for the sole purpose of allowing missing middle housing. At the same time, the amendments affirm the continued applicability of future land use maps outside of the new citywide land use designation and clearly specifies the requirement that zoning cases in the future must be consistent with existing future land use maps. As proposed by staff, the final map of the missing middle land use designation would include the original transition area boundaries as well as missing middle designations in high opportunity areas. Based on your action at third reading, the zone criteria for applying RM1 and R4 is likely to result in less than the total land area included in the missing middle designation. That would mean that future zoning requests for RM1 or R4 in these areas could be considered without further amendments to the Imagine Austin Comprehensive Plan Growth Concept Map. And as you all know, the Growth Concept Map is proposed to be amended every 5 years. The Imagine Austin plan is proposed to be amended every 5 years. And with that, Brent's going to go over item number 2.
And item number 2 is Brent Lloyd, LDC team, is just talking about the code amendments and the map that are before you. And as we mentioned, we're here to answer questions. We're familiar with all your amendments. We've studied them as best we can. And we're prepared. We posted a staff report that I think you all have seen that summarizes what we did in response to your first reading amendments. And we're not going to go over all that in detail. We tried to do that at our work sessions last week. But we will be prepared to answer any questions you have about what we did at first reading, as well as diving a little deeper into all of your amendments and helping you craft them in a way that will be workable. And before we talk about kind of the next steps in the process going forward, our chief consultant, Peter Park, I believe, has a few words.
Thank you, Brent. Good afternoon. I just would like to reinforce that stating the obvious, this is an ambitious project. And with each of the conversations that we've all been involved in on this journey, there are a lot of questions, which also create the need for more information and more data. And through this process, the staff across the board have been diving deep into more and more information sets and more data to bring to Council more facts and more data for your decisions to be made from. That, as much as we can, we're trying to align those findings in the data to your direction that you've provided. So I just would like to reinforce that the recommendations that you see and that we'll be discussing further have had the benefit of additional analysis and additional data sets. And those same information sets will be available as we continue our discussions.
Finally, before you all begin and start talking about your amendments, we just want to discuss the path forward from second reading to third and address several important issues that we know are of interest to Council. First, regarding the code text, we recommend that you continue to try to find the right balance between being specific in your intentions without being too prescriptive in the means of implementation. As a result of the work that the Council did at first reading, the issues have become more clearly defined, which will help us to focus your second reading amendments on the issues of most importance to Council and the community. Second, regarding the zone map, we want to expand on an important concept discussed at first reading and in the most recent supplemental staff report as well. Specifically, we want to talk about the zone conversion table. Zone conversion tables, sometimes called translation tables, are a tool used in comprehensive code revisions to reflect how old zones are being converted to new zones. In many cases, a current zone is simply converted in its entirety to a new zone with updated land use and site development standards. In other cases, zones are converted to one or more different zones based on clearly defined criteria or conditions. A sample conversion table was provided in the third supplemental staff report, which establishes conversion rules proposed for the development reserve zone. After second reading, we'll be providing a comprehensive zone conversion table that will show how all of the current Title 25 zones are proposed to be converted into the new LDC zones. The table will list comparable equivalent new zones for each of Title 25's existing zoning categories. And in those cases where an existing zone may be converted to more than one new zone, the table will establish citywide criteria of broad applicability, defining the conditions in which particular zones apply. In finalizing the conversion table, staff may identify cases where previously discussed outcomes for particular zones don't lend themselves to broad citywide zone criteria. In those instances, the best practice is simply to apply comparable equivalent zoning and defer further refinements until after code adoption. We will identify those cases as well as our recommendations at the time we provide the draft conversion table. We don't anticipate a large number of these situations, but there probably will be cases where, on further review, some of the zone criteria previously discussed are too site-specific to be applied through the LDC revision process. Those situations can be addressed following LDC adoption in one of two possible ways. The first way is really for simple cases, situations that recur in the same way throughout the city. And in those situations, it may be possible to use a zoning refinement process that applies appropriate new zones to particular categories or situations all at once. Examples may include an ordinance addressing instances of split zoning or certain types of nonconformity or situations where council wants to focus on the actual uses that are occurring on properties. We believe that those situations, many of which have already been daylighted throughout the deliberations that have occurred up to now, we believe that there are many of those situations that can be dealt with without an extensive on-the-ground planning process and can be handled, hopefully, in a reasonably efficient manner. And the second approach is what we've referred to as next level or small area planning, which involves cases where more site-specific, detailed planning is necessary to determine how new zoning classifications should be applied. And as our work continues and as we move forward, we look forward to proposing more detailed processes for each of these types of zoning procedures and identifying, based on your feedback and your amendments and the deliberations that have occurred, the types of cases that would most appropriately fit within those two different procedures. As you consider amendments for second reading, we will help keep these principles in mind, and we'll identify cases where we believe, from a best practices standpoint, application of new zoning categories should be deferred until after code adoption. And that concludes staff's opening comments, and we're available for questions.
Thank you for laying that out. Do you have that in writing somewhere? I mean, I'm sorry if you've sent it out already, and if you don't, if you could write it out. And the reason I'm asking for that, it's important information for the public to understand, and so if you can put it on your website, that might be helpful.
We will provide a memo to council kind of outlining the process and highlighting some of the key considerations that we've tried to summarize.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not asking you to go ahead and do all the detailed work. I understand that may come, that you may have to spend some more time doing that. I'm just talking about at a level of what you just explained to us.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember
A couple of quick questions. Thank you for the maps that we received on Friday. I appreciate those paper copies of the detailed. Are we able to get a file for our entire district so that we could have one map that we can show to our constituents? And if so, do you know when those PDFs will be ready?
Lacey Patterson's going to come up.
And just one thing I noticed on this latest, in looking at the PDFs, it requires people on some computers to sign into Box. We might just consider I had it happen on 2 different devices. We might consider providing some instructions to users how to do that.
Yeah, so noted, yes. So the one PDF of each district, rather than breaking them into the 4 or more areas that we have, would be time consuming. So we would prefer to work with individual offices to see if we could print out maps in the tile version and mount them for you.
Okay.
It's about a 20-hour process is what we're to convert to create the larger map rather than the smaller maps that we've done.
I'm not sure that we have any printers up in City Hall that print to a size that would allow us to then tile them. I mean, we can talk about it after, but
Yeah.
as we've discussed, I know that. I mean, I've brought copies of those full maps to lots of neighborhood meetings and other gatherings, and I think people appreciate being able to see the district in context. And for that matter, I mean, my office got maps for the other districts as well, so we could get a picture of what was going on around the city. So I'd hope to be able to do that, to have that one PDF rather than kind of the six individual small maps that it's challenging for constituents, I think, to try to get a sense of the whole picture in a particular district if they're looking at just the detail, though the detail is obviously also very important.
Councilmember Lacey Patterson, Planning and Zoning. I do want to ask, are you asking for full district PDFs before the adoption of second reading or after second reading?
So, I mean, at this point, at any point would be super, but I mean, my hope is to have them before second reading. Obviously, we're in the middle of second reading, so that's probably not going to be achievable, but if we could at least work toward getting those so that I can go to my constituents and show them, where we were on second reading, that would be helpful.
So as we can definitely work to create them with the third reading map and try to also work as we do that process, maybe try to create ones for second reading retroactively also.
Okay, maybe we can talk afterward about the timing on that, and I'm happy to use the tiling thing. But we had to outsource these. Again, we don't have the capacity on our printers here to print, huge maps. So not here at City Hall. And then my second question is, thank you for the information by, I think it was in response to Councilmember Alter's question about how many properties district by district had been proposed for rezoning to R4 and RM1. And I'm still really just looking through that, but it's very valuable information. Is there any way to determine, as I looked at, to the extent that I'm familiar with some of the areas in districts other than my own, it looked like some of that in certain areas is actually just equivalent zoning versus, changes from SF3 to RM1. Do you have any ability to provide us with counts on how many of those were equivalent zoning versus actual upzonings?
Yes. We can follow up on the council question portal with that specific roll down of information.
That would be great. Yeah. Thank you. Do you have any sense of how long that might take to get?
We can likely do that tomorrow. That's
Super.
not a intensive query.
Thank you very much. That would be really useful.
Okay. Leslie.
I'd like to get the maps files too, and if we have to outsource it to like Miller Blueprint or something, that'd be fine. If we could, and then we could have it printed on fiber so that it could be rolled up and unrolled, and it would be a lot more useful that way. So if staff would work with my staff, I'm happy to use my staff budget for that. But I do think that's something that all of us would benefit from having. On the capacity numbers, I would like to request a briefing. I think we mentioned it at the break to the city manager, and I think maybe some other council members have dug into these numbers more than I've had time to, but we'd like to get an explicator briefing on the capacity numbers. And then I wanted to give staff an opportunity to maybe, Mr. Lloyd, could you unpack a little bit more on what you just talked to us about on the further refinements and so forth. I get the sense that in the conversion tables and the translation and the balance between the general and the specific, I get the idea that there's a lot of import in what you are saying, and so I wanted to unpack that a little bit and give you a chance to kind of translate what you just said so we could hear it again.
Sure. Well, I think there's been several occasions in the process where we've emphasized the importance of having criteria that guide the zoning decisions. And I think that as we start to finalize the conversion table, which is the table that shows sort of the circumstances and conditions under which an existing zone is converted into one or more new zones, I think that as we start to finalize that table for your consideration, we will identify some situations where, from a best practices standpoint, it makes sense to defer some of the zoning until after code adoption and to err on the side of a simpler approach that defers some of the more detailed site-specific, context-specific sorts of zoning decisions until later. And there's not a bright line. There's not a specific defined standard. But I think as we've had the benefit of the last several months of working with you and hearing your amendments and considering them, I think that some general principles have presented themselves. And I think we will be well positioned in the next few weeks to present council with a proposed translation table that reflects and memorializes a great deal of what you've already voted on. But in a few instances, we will be suggesting some modifications and some deferral of some of the zoning until later in the process.
So would I be right to say that the table will tend to eliminate where we've seen the zoning changes applied consistently or inconsistently across the city?
I think that there are going to be situations where, the conditions that determine whether one zone converts to, whether an existing zone converts to one new zone versus a different new zone, I think those conditions will be ones that invariably are going to be different in particular areas. For example, corridors. That's a defining planning concept that has informed a great deal of your work. And corridors are not, located exactly in the same places throughout the city. So I think that there will be some situations where the criteria are realized on the ground in different ways in different areas. But I think definitely Council Member Poole, we anticipate that the recommendations that we provide in the coming weeks will simplify some of the criteria and result in a slightly more streamlined set of conversion rules that has emerged so far.
So like if R2 were in this part of the city, the way R2 is defined in this part of the city and the kind of zoning impacts it would have here would be the same no matter where the R2 would be placed throughout the city.
I'm not sure that I exactly follow your question, but yes, R2 is going to be the same zone.
And I just picked that out of the air. You could it's a proxy.
Yeah. But definitely I think that, there are some of the zones that are where council's articulated criteria that are tied towards proximity to corridors, other features, and those are things that are just as a practical matter going to vary depending on location based on the presence of corridors. But definitely the zones are the same wherever they're applied. And again, we think that a lot of what council has voted on and the criteria that you've laid out for us are ones that are going to be perfectly amenable to the approach that we're describing. But we want to be candid and clear that there probably will be some instances where we're going to propose some changes, some simplifications, and some deferral of some of the zoning until after adoption.
Okay, that's great. I know that a number of the amendments that I had been contemplating are more to try to bring into my district treatment of a particular zoning the way it is being treated in a different part of town. So I was looking for that consistency as well. And so amendments that I have been contemplating would be to restore that consistency and standardization. I look forward to seeing those conversion tables. That was, if you remember, an ask that I made, I think it was during Code Next, that we have a crosswalk to show where old code becomes new code and what would be what would be similar and what would be different, including the terminology. So I'm glad that we are getting the translation table. I called them a crosswalk, but I think it's the same concept. So thank you for bringing that to us as soon as possible. Thanks.
Sounds good. Let's get going here.
I have some questions.
Okay.
Well. Thank you. So, Mr. Lloyd, can you give an example of if you defer the zoning to the next stage, what then you would code it this time? Would that then be an F25, or is it, how should we be thinking about that?
It would be what we're referring to as comparable equivalent, and that doesn't mean it's exactly the same. This is a process of updating and modernizing the code, and so the use and development standards are definitely going to be a little bit different, but it would be for each zone, there's sort of a comparable equivalent default category. And so in those cases where we determine deferring some of the zoning makes more sense, it would simply be defaulting to the comparable equivalent and deferring the application of the more complex zoning categories until after code adoption.
And then I wanted clarification with respect to the F25. So when you were speaking, were you talking about those instances that you were going to explain when those F25s were rezoned to new categories? Or were you talking about situations where we said they need to be F25 because they're complicated special agreements and our new zoning categories don't fit them? How are you treating those?
So F25 is a new zone. It's a new zone that incorporates the old standards as they existed, they're not old yet, but as they exist today, with some modifications. The F25 doesn't simply incorporate everything that exists today. It makes some changes to compatibility, for example. So F25 is a new zone, but we have developed criteria in response to council's direction for when F25 is appropriate and when it's not. And definitely the more we are confronted with situations where there's not a workable comparable equivalent category, those are the types of situations where F25 has been proposed to be applied. A lot of and it's not an exact match, a lot of the zones as they exist today are not, reflected in their exact form in the new code, but if the new zones generally regulate the types of issues that are regulated under today's code, then we have not proposed F25 zoning. But where a zoning category is so unique, like a planned development agreement, those sorts of things, and it's a zoning category that we're not proposing to be used on a going forward basis. Plan development agreements are an old tool that the city used to use, and they're not best practices, and for a variety of reasons, they're not proposed to be an authorized zoning district under the new code. So those are given F25 that would incorporate those standards as they exist with some modifications. So F25 has its own set of rules that have been used to determine when it's applied. And that may also be a situation where, as we start to finalize the draft translation table for your consideration, where we propose some streamlining, some simplification.
I would appreciate if you could point me in the right direction to see what some of those changes are in F25 that you mentioned, compatibility, and where we would review those moving forward. And if there's also a way, if there are properties that are changing from F25 to something else that are at this point not changed, if we have some way to surface those in case we would miss some of those in the process that you're setting up. And then my last question is for Ms. Badeau today. For the comprehensive planning, I wasn't sure that I was totally following you. I think what you said was that we were going to be adopting in the comprehensive plan, the larger transition area from draft 1, even if we don't zone for that now, so that you don't have to make changes to the amendments to amend it every time. Is that what you just said?
Yes, Councilmember Alter. What I laid out for item number 1 is the staff recommendation, which is the map that we recommended on October 4th, and that is in the backup for second reading, with the addition of the missing middle that's been mapped in high opportunity areas as per the current second reading draft. So comprehensively, that makes up the growth concept for missing middle and transition areas. And it is, of course, the council's decision on whether to keep that as a growth concept or to vote to direct staff, the city manager and staff, to have those match what is approved on second reading, and we would revise a new map for you for your third reading, for your third reading decisions.
Okay, thank you. I'll want to talk about that more, but probably won't resolve it during second reading.
Councilmember Kitchen.
Yeah, this may be more for a later conversation. I'm not sure. I thought the idea was to have a match between what we end up mapping and the mapping in Imagine Austn. So we can talk about that more later.
Sure.
I do have a different question.
Okay.
Go ahead. Okay. So you had talked a minute ago about the translation tables and the translating existing zones to the new zones and about F25. And so I would just ask you to either speak to it now or include in those tables how you're handling certain circumstances that in the past have been handled by COs. I know we're not continuing with COs, and I know the attempt has been to do comparable zoning and fit those into new zoning categories. But I want to understand in what circumstances are they fit into new zoning categories, and what circumstances are they F25? Because I want to, and in what circumstances are we just losing certain aspects of a property's zoning because we don't have any comparable way to do it?
Sure. Councilmember Kitchen, I know that we want to have a meeting with you offline, and so we can talk about that further. But just very briefly to touch on a few of the points in general, as the new zones were developed, staff looked at all the universe of COs that are out there and looked at common themes, common ways in which the COs demonstrate a preference for certain mixes of uses, for certain mixes of building form, for certain mixes of heights, those sorts of things. And to the extent that common themes were discernible in the COs, those themes were used as a basis for developing the new zones. And so in those cases where the COs really were capable of being addressed through the new zoning categories, maybe not precisely or exactly, but generally, than it was proposed for comparable equivalent zoning. And it was really in those instances where the COs get into highly context-specific conditions, which generally is not a best practices tool for zoning. That's one of the reasons why COs are not recommended to be used going forward. But in those situations where the comparable equivalent zoning simply doesn't get at the types of things that are embodied in the COs, in those instances, we have proposed F25. And we will be clarifying, refining, and presenting to council in more detail sort of that logic chain and how those decisions were made, as well as potentially some refinements.
Okay, thank you.
All right, colleagues. What we're going to do now, I'm going to entertain a motion to approve items 1 through 3 on the agenda as recommended by staff, plus the amendments that have been handed out, less the items that are pulled. That will then become the base motion that we'll eventually vote on. No, we're just going to make the motion. We're not going to vote on the motion until we get to the very end of the process. So, will someone make that motion? Councilmember Kassar makes that motion. Is there a second to that motion? Go ahead.
My question is, you're taking the motion on all of the items, right? Would it not
Correct.
make more sense to take them separately? Because we may end up dividing them later.
We can certainly divide them later, but we
Okay.
can do that then.
Okay.
All right. Is there a second to the motion? Councilmember Flanagan seconds the motion. All right. That's the base motion in front of us. Now let's go through and let's pull from the amendments the items that we want to discuss or further amend. I handed out 2 documents this morning. There's a regular one and a V2. Is there any objection to proceeding with the V2 document? Hearing none, that's the one we're going to go with. If anybody doesn't have a hard copy of that in front of them, let me know. I have an additional copy. Handed it out this morning. All right, let's just go through this. It's one of 19 pages. Let's see which items are pulled. Okay? I begin with Harper-Madison 1. Does anyone want to pull that? Okay, that is pulled by Kitchen and Alter. Harper-Madison 2, pulled by Alter. Kathy, Councilmember Tovo, did you pull that too? Did you indicate? Okay. Kassar 1, pulled by Kitchen. Tovo 4, Harper-Madison and Kassar, pull. Adler, R2A. Colleagues, I'm going to pull this myself to have it come back a little bit later. I will tell you that the intent of this was to address basically the tract home development that's happening in our city outside of downtown. It's the smaller lots with medium-sized homes built on them. That's the current product that's being developed. I'm a little concerned about forcing that development outside of the city because that just increases commute times, people coming in. So I'm going to pull this to rework this, but since the language is going to change, I just wanted you to know probably what I'll focus on here is just Greenfield and talking to staff. There are protections that if it's Greenfield development, it kind of means it's not in the areas downtown, but just saying Greenfield. And that comes with such guarantees from development right now that I think having the higher FAR works. Right now it's unlimited FAR. I have 0.75 in here. I think 0.6 might be better, but without being prescriptive. The question is just to try to maintain the ability to have that product somewhere in our city. All right, but I'm pulling that myself right now, but I'll be pulling that back up for our tranche 2 or later. So that one is pulled as well. All right, continuing on. Harper-Madison 3. Pulled by Councilmember Alter. Harper-Madison 4. Kitchen pulls that. Kassar 2. No one's pulling. Councilmember Tovo pulls that.
Mayor, in the interest of time, Why don't we just start going through them, and then if there's agreement when we get to it, there would be agreement. We'll just move to the next one. Oh, okay, sorry.
I think we'll just go through real fast. Kitchen 1. I'm going to pull that. I have an amendment. I like that, but I'm going to do a simple amendment, I think, to that, so I'm going to pull that. Kitchen 2. Cassar pulls. That gets us to page 4 of 19. Kitchen 3. Cassar pulls, and Harper Madison pulls. Kitchen 4. Same 2, pulling. Flanagan 12. No one pulling that? Flanagan? No, I'm sorry. Okay. Alter and Alter, pull that. Tovo and Alter, pull that. Flanagan 13. Tovo pulls that. Pool 1. Harper Madison pulls that. Tovo 5. Mayor Pro Tem pulls that. Tovo 6. Harper Madison and Mayor Pro Tem pull that. Tovo 12. Same as Alter 6. Same 2. Pulling. I'm sorry.
Mayor, I didn't understand who you said pulled.
Harper Madison and the Mayor Pro Tem.
Pulled number 12.
Pulled number 12.
And just as a side note, some of these would also have jumped in and pulled, but so I don't know that it's
not
meaningful,
necessary.
but we'll all have an opportunity to ask questions.
Right. But it's helpful to the degree that the sponsor can know, what people are thinking. Tovo 13. Same 2 pulling those. Alter 6. Same 2 pulling those.
I just want to clarify that Alter 6 and Tovo 12 are not the same
I
thing.
didn't mean the same.
Yeah.
Point well taken. They're not the same. Getting to section number 3, centers and corridors. Harper Madison 5. Kitchen pulls and pool. Kitchen and pool. That gets us to page 6. Cassar 3 is withdrawn. Cassar 3 on page 6 of 19 is withdrawn. Cassar 4 on microbreweries. Alter pulls that. Cassar 5. No one pulling that. Councilmember Tovo pulls that. Cassar 8. Cassar 8. Why don't you ask your question real fast?
It says, I'm not sure what it applies to, because it says only allow a portion of the pedestrian ordinance uses. And what properties are you talking about?
So this is something that we actually worked together on last time, where we wanted the bottom of VMU to sometimes be residential uses. However, the new code that came back sometimes allows the bottom floor to be part residential use, and then the other half could be the residential lobby, which eliminates any sort of public coming in and out use. And so this would reserve some portion to still be retail or something else, unless they go to staff for a waiver because it's just an unworkable place.
Okay.
People okay with that? All right. Cassar 5 is in the base motion. No, Cassar 8. I'm sorry, Cassar 8 is in. That felt good. Cassar 9. Northwest District. Councilmember Tovo pulls that, and Harper Madison pulls that. Okay. That gets us to 8 of 19. Kitchen 5. Flanagan and Harper Madison. Flanagan 14. Kitchen pulls that. It's close. Flanagan 15. Flanagan 15 is in. I'm sorry. Hang on one second.
What?
I'm going to make a change to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that one is pulled by Councilmember Flanagan. Okay. Pool 2, Mayor Pro Tem and Harper Madison. Pool 3, same 2. Pool 4, same 2. LS1.
I was going to amend this one. It's posted on the message board, so I guess I'll pull my own.
So let's pull that one, and then everybody should, I don't know if you have that to hand out. You might want to consider doing that at some point. Doesn't have to be right now.
We've got it. We'll send it along.
Sounds good. TOVO 2. Harper Madison and Mayor Pro Tem. TOVO 3. Same 2. TOVO 9. Same 2.
There's not any need to pull that one because I'm going to withdraw it. It's identical to Councilmember Ellis's.
Okay.
This is an issue that had been raised with our office as well as other offices. And, ordinarily I would work with the council member who represents that area, but we're in different subquorums. But given that it's identical to LS1, which did that get pulled, or was it pulled by the same two who were pulling mine, or was it just pulled by Councilmember Ellis?
She pulled it herself.
Oh, that's interesting because it's the same amendment. But in any case, I'm withdrawing that one.
So I have a
We
question.
just had done it. Councilmember Ellis pulled her own on LS1. Council TOVO 9 has been withdrawn.
I have a question.
Yes.
So were you saying that LS1 is the same as this one, and so, but you're bringing it back with amendment? Is that right?
Yes, I had tweaked the language a little bit, and we've got printouts, but it's also on the message board if you have that window open.
Okay. Alter 3. Mayor Pro Tem pulls that. Adler CC1 goes in. That gets us to 10 of 19. Harper Madison 6. I have a question about this one, so I'm going to pull this one. Kassar 6. Kitchen pulls that one, and Tovo. Kitchen, Tovo. Kassar 7. Kassar 7 goes in. Nope.
Sorry, just keeping up with a lot. No, I need to pull that one as well, please.
Okay, Tovo pulls Kassar 7. Kitchen 7.
We probably should pull that. I think that one and Kassar 6, I just wanted to talk about some potential adjustments, and they probably need to go together.
And mine is also similar.
Right, pull 5A and 5B look like there's some overlap on subject area. So let's pull those. Kitchen 7, Kassar 6, and 1C, and pull 5A and 5B. But here, it's Kitchen 7, which we are pulling. Okay, pull 5. Looks like we're pulling that as all part of that. Okay. Excuse me. Pull 6. Harper Madison and the Mayor Pro Tem. Page 12. LS2. Councilmember Alter. Tovo 1. Mayor Pro Tem pulls that. Tovo 14. Mayor Pro Tem and Harper Madison. Tovo 15. Same 2. Gets us to non-zoning. Harper Madison 7. Tovo pulls that. Harper Madison 8. Tovo pulls that. And Councilman Poole pulls that one as well. Okay, Harper Madison 9. Tovo and Poole. Harper Madison 10, pool, kitchen, and altar. Kitchen 6. Kitchen 6. Excuse me. Harper Madison pulls that. Okay. Flanagan 6. Pool and kitchen. Pull that. Flanagan 7. Tovo, kitchen, altar. Flanagan 8. Tovo pulls that. Flanagan 9. Tovo pulls that. Flanagan 10. Tovo pulls that. Flanagan 11.
Mayor,
Tovo's pulls that. Sorry.
And I think that's a programmatic.
Yeah,
item. I think it's on the
it probably
wrong
didn't
page.
fit in this. Okay, so let's withdraw that as part of this process. Okay, withdrawn. Okay, Ellis 3. Pool pulls that. Tovo 7. Harper Madison pulls that. Tovo 10. Harper Madison pulls that. Altar 1. Kassar pulls that. Altar 2. Councilmember Kassar pulls that. Adler NZ 1. Altar pulls that. Page 16 of 19, in the process section, Harper Madison 11. Councilmember Poole and Tovo pull that. What? And Mr. Flanagan. Harper Madison 12. Councilmember Tovo.
Mayor Adler,
Yeah.
let me ask a question. I'm finding that you're putting some specific emphasis on who pulled what. There are a couple of times where you didn't recognize me, where I indicated that I'd like to pull an item. Is it of any importance, or
It is only for the sponsor to know. You don't have to do it.
Okay.
To what if you want to give that heads up to the sponsor,
Sure.
It's not a bad thing to do.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, doesn't change anything procedurally. That gets us to kitchen 8, Kassar. Okay, that gets us to kitchen 9, Harper Madison. Flanagan 1. Altar. Okay. Yes, Altar's pulling that. Flanagan 2.
I'm withdraw Flanagan.
Flanagan 2 is withdrawn. Gets us to Flanagan 3. Kitchen, altar, and pool. Flanagan 4. Tovo pulls that. Tovo and Poole pull that. Flanagan 5.
And if I could, I just want to say some of these I just need examples because I don't know exactly what problem we're solving, and so we haven't had a chance to have conversation.
That's fine. Flanagan 5.
I'm going to withdraw 5. I'm going to do
Okay.
a work with Harper Madison on this.
Okay. 5 is withdrawn. Flanagan 5 is withdrawn. Ellis 4. Harper Madison pulls that. Okay. Ellis 5. Kitchen pulls that.
And again, that's just one I want to talk about. I don't know how many changes. I just want to talk about it.
Okay. Tovo 8. Cassar and Harper Madison. Tovo 11. Cassar and Harper Madison and Flanagan. Alter 4. Harper Madison and Flanagan. Alter 5. Harper Madison. All right, that's all the documents. We got a couple in there, but our work is cut out in front of us. It is 3:57 now. We have about an hour, which we can get started in this if we're going to break about 5 o'clock as we had intended to do. Let's see if we can knock out the residential section. The first one of these is adjusting the duplex FAR to 0.5, pulled by Kitchen and Alter. And staff, don't feel like you need an invitation. If there's stuff you think that the council should know on any one of these, please raise your hand and help us in the process. Okay? Councilmember Alter.
So as I understand this amendment, it increases the Florida area ratio to 0.5 for duplexes where it would otherwise be lower in R1 to R3. So it's essentially allowing us to make bigger duplexes. Is that correct, staff? In my view, we're already creating pretty big duplexes with rules that don't allow you to separate the walls as much. And so I would really like to understand from Harper Madison why we need to be able to do bigger ones than we're already able to do. And I'd like to know from staff if this creates a disincentive for having a third unit with the graduated FAR setup that we have.
If you don't mind, I'll let them respond because I think it may answer your question. If you want to respond to the latter, I'll respond to the former.
So in the testing that we did, well, let me go back. We looked at, in terms of the data, we tried to understand the median lot sizes, right? And so for areas that were mapped R2, the median lot area is 8,500 square feet. And so we found that 0.4 would yield units at 1,700 square feet. And so our analysis of duplexes that have been permitted in the last 10 years showed us a median average size of 1,900 square feet. So we were, on the one hand, trying to find a number that is pretty close to what the market has actually been delivering over the last 10 years. That we do recognize. So there's the size of a unit that could result. The FAR for a single unit in an R2 is 0.4, right? And if we keep it at 0.4, then we aren't really introducing an incentive to get duplexes in 2-unit zones, right? That there's no difference in terms of potential FAR if one was doing a 1-to-1 replacement or if one is moving to do a duplex. And so that's what we understand the intention is, to add an additional 0.1 FAR. So there's a differential between the single unit development and a duplex. In the math that we did and understanding the lot sizes, one thing that we had discussed is possibly coming to a 0.45. So there's a little bit of a bump beyond a single unit, but it isn't as large as 0.5.
And the point, even with the 0.4, that doesn't include the exemptions which is also a livable space, which in the examples that you gave, could be 400 square feet of additional livable space beyond the 1,700. And they're building those already right now.
That's correct. Yeah.
I just don't see. So, and what about the graduated FAR? How does that impact? I mean, because if you go up to 0.5, then what do you have to do for getting a triplex or 3 units?
So when we're in the R3, we have a 0.6, right? So we did find that there was to get to 3 units on both the minimum size lot, especially on the minimum size lot of 5,000 square feet, the additional FAR would be needed to actually create a unit of some size, still smaller than what has been built in the last 10 years. But as you mentioned, if it was designed such that one could take the garage exemption and there was attic space, there could be additional 400 feet of attic space and the 200-foot exemption for the parking that could be translated to livable space in that unit.
Yeah, I just think we're getting bigger and bigger units with everything we do, and I think we're disincentivizing the larger number of units with this.
If you'd like for me to speak to my there, essentially what I think we are doing is incentivizing single-family homes over duplexes. I think with the Florida area ratio not increasing, not being able to produce duplexes means you get a 2,000 square foot really expensive house as opposed to a duplex that 2 people could split ownership of. And so that was the intention there. In fact, looking through some of our history, there was a time in Austin's history where we built lots of duplexes. And then there came the time where we stopped building so many duplexes. And a lot of that had to do with the appeal of building a single family home over the duplex. And the FAR, the minimum FAR shift, I think would make it more productive. The 8,500 square foot lot is so uncommon in Austin, just in general, but especially in East Austin. Being able to make the necessary shift, I think, comes with this very, very slight increase in Florida area ratio. And you can certainly correct me if I'm off base.
Well, I might also offer, when we looked at all the lot sizes that are mapped from R2 to RM1 in areas of opportunity, and then the rest of the areas, and vulnerable areas. The vulnerable areas, the median lot size was 8,000 square feet. Then areas of high opportunity, the median lot area is 9,200 square feet. So in those scenarios, if the FAR for the 8,000 square foot lot is 0.5, one would have 2,000 square feet of building area, or averaging to 1,000 square feet per unit. Again, plus the garage potentially and additional 400 square feet in the attic. On the 9,200 square foot lot, the 0.5 would create the possibility of 2,300 square feet units. So that's pretty big.
Mayor,
Councilmember Tovo.
I would love the opportunity to actually read some of what you're describing, Mr. Parks. Is there a chance that we could table this, maybe get that in writing and review it?
Where are you reading that from? I mean, that's just from the...
It's just it's a lot of numbers coming at us.
So this is, again, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of the data, this is just some of the information that staff has been working with in the calibrations of the zones, right? And again, it is clear to us that if we keep 0.4 as for single or for 2 units, then we are missing sort of the incentive of trying to get duplexes, right? So again, directionally, in terms of the 0.5 increase, that would help. That would help to privilege the duplex development rather than a one-on.
Councilmember Tovo has asked for us to table this. Is there a...
You know, I'm okay. That's fine.
Okay.
I can review this later.
Okay. Further discussion on this amendment. Councilmember Poole and then Councilmember Kitchen.
Yeah, I'd just like to say we're seeing the duplexes currently being built at the 0.4 FAR, and so I don't understand how the 0.5 FAR would be smaller than what's being built now at 0.4. That was a question to Mr. Park.
I don't think I understood the question. Could you repeat it?
Well, when you were describing what we are getting now, you were saying that the 0.5 would incentivize more duplexes, and it needed to be, and that the 0.5 would be smaller than what we are getting now. So unless I misheard you, I wanted to understand why you thought the 0.5 FAR would be a smaller unit than the units that are being built now under the 0.4 FAR.
Yeah. So under the minimum lot size, we definitely would be. And again, that's why we had the 1,300 square feet.
Wait, can you say that? Can you say that loud?
So in the zone, we have a minimum lot size of 5,000 square feet, right? And so in that scenario, even if you did a 0.5 FAR, right?
That's 2,500?
Total divided by 2. Right.
Okay, so 1,250 each, which is larger than many of the homes that are in the central part of the city.
Right.
Plus
so
400.
Of the last, again, the last 10 years of data, of permit data, these units are around 1,800 square feet. I mean, again, that's what the unit size, a new unit size, based on the permit data, ends up being. So again, we were trying to calibrate to something that allows something comparable that has been the products that have been built in the last 10 years.
Okay, and so the permit data would also have information on the lot size for those 1,900 square foot units and also the zip code of the general area of town where those are being built. It's possible that you and I are talking about completely different parts of town.
That could be. Yeah. Again, in areas of high opportunity, the median lot size is 9,200 square feet, right? So with that would, at a 0.5, that would allow 2,300 square foot units. Right.
Okay.
So
my understanding of this, for me, is that by going to 0.5, we reward someone who's building a duplex as opposed to building a single-family home. And the policy behind this is to encourage people to build duplexes as opposed to single-family homes, which happens when you let them get additional FAR associated with that. Discussion, Councilmember Kassar.
Yeah, I'm going to support this, and then on third reading, we can figure out exactly the right number, if it's 0.47 or 0.48 or 0.5. But in my view, and my understanding of this is that we are encouraging smaller units by going to 0.5 because at 0.4 on an 8,000 square foot lot, you have two options to max out at: 3,200 square foot, one unit, or 1,600 square foot, two separate units. It's the same square footage, but one is a much bigger unit at 30. So when we're asking for the numbers on one or the other, it doesn't actually answer the question, are you encouraging smaller or bigger units?
Right.
So if you leave them both at 0.4, then you've got two choices, 3,200 or 1,600 and 1,600. I would like to be getting more 1,300 square foot product, but the fact of the matter is, if we want to try to modify our existing regime some, then having a little bit more of an FAR for multiple units actually gets you smaller units because people are more likely to do the multiple smaller units with that. So that's my intent, and that's why I'll support this, and then we can try to figure out on third reading if the exact right number is 0.48 versus 0.5 versus 0.52. I think we can work on those numbers.
Councilmember Alter.
So on a 9,200 square foot lot, then you'd get 4,600. Plus, if you had 2 units, you would get 400 of exempt attic space. That's 5,400. And there's nothing to say that that has to be divided in 2. I could have a really big, as long as I have a duplex, I could have a 3,500 square foot house, and if I count my attic in that, and then the balance is still another unit that's almost 2,000 square feet of living space. So when you take into consideration that we have this 400 square foot attic exemption, and you start doing this, we're getting really quite big units here, and I'm not understanding why we're trying to replicate the unit sizes we've seen in our market over the last 10 years when everyone's been arguing that our current code is incentivizing houses that are larger than what we're trying to facilitate. And we have to take into consideration all of these pieces together.
Councilor Kitchen.
Well, what I'm hearing is sort of two, roughly bucketed, 2 different policy approaches that I think we've all agreed on. And so this, one of them being that, we want to encourage duplexes, and I do support that. And if I heard you right, that was the main thing. And then one of them being to disincent the large single-family homes. And the concern I'm hearing about this is that this may inadvertently and unintentionally do that in some parts of town. So I'm wondering if instead of designating this as a just duplex FAR to 0.5, if we might make it broader, to ask the staff to consider a way to adjust the duplex FAR so that FAR, so you could get some larger units, but it may require some more, some drilling down more. So maybe it's for the smaller square foot lots, you do a 0.5. I mean, I'm just making stuff up here. But maybe you could do a 0.5 for smaller lots, but once you get to bigger lots, you don't do that. Or there may be some other kind of, I realize that makes it more complex, but what I'm hearing is a desire to make sure that we are really getting there in terms of incenting duplexes, but doing that in a way that in parts of town where you might have a larger square foot, where you're really it's really just another way to have a larger single-family home. So I don't know, Councilmember, if you would consider broadening the language here to get at what you're trying to get at, and then so that the staff has some opportunity to kind of think through that, or I don't know what you'd
I
like
appreciate
to
you trying to find a compromise, but the truth of the matter is we've already done the modeling, which is how we landed on what we landed on. I feel like we definitely went through the exercise of considering all of the implications in the various parts of town and considered multiple lot sizes. And at the end of the day, I put forward the amendment that we did because I feel like it's the way to go.
Okay, well, I'd like to ask a question then.
Sure.
May I?
Yes.
Okay, so the concern that I'm hearing is the concern that Councilmember Alter is raising. So if you have a larger square foot lot, you could end up with a single family home that's much larger because you don't have to split the square footage. And in some parts of town, that just accelerates what is happening in some parts of town where you're tearing down older homes and building much larger single family homes. So it is creating, I support duplexes, and I support the effort that you're trying to get at, but I see what's happening in some of the areas that I work with, and this really has the potential, very serious potential, to do what Councilmember Alter is talking about. And so, whereas I'd like to be able to support you, I can't. We're going in the wrong direction in terms of accelerating what we're seeing in some of these neighborhoods. So
I would like to ask staff to confirm or deny the validity of that concern, because what I'm not hearing you guys say is you said median lot size, but you didn't say common lot size. And those are two different sizes. And so I think we need to talk about common so that we can accurately represent how frequently we're talking about the median as opposed to the common. But I mean, I think to speak to Councilmember Alter and Councilmember Kitchen's concern about inadvertently creating the opportunity for additional larger single family, I guess maybe the comparison, the cost benefit, if you could just offer some clarity there.
Sure. I mean, in any scheme, maintaining the point FAR, which is under current code, is always going to allow more potential square footage in a single unit, single family house, right, than if one were to do the duplex. Again, the staff does agree, we are interested in finding a way to try to incentivize the 2-unit in an R2 zone. That is to, right, at least get to more units. So I don't know that, carrying the 0.4 for the single family house is necessarily incentivizing a larger single family house. It's simply carrying forward kind of what you can do today under the current code. The 0.5, what the 0.5 does, I mean, so the 0.5 does allow for more square footage in a building. The distribution of that square footage might be one is bigger than the other. That's true. But it is 2 units, right? Again, with the council's intention to create opportunities for more units. And we were just simply trying to point out how big potentially these units could be in a duplex format. Again, I think the staff would be very interested in pursuing a way to create a difference between the single unit FAR and the duplex, the 2-unit in the R2, in order to encourage the development of 2 units in those areas.
Councilmember Kassar.
My understanding of this amendment is that it would create no more entitlement for a single-family house. It only would create more entitlement for a duplex. So there would be no way that you can do a bigger single-family house. In fact, I would be surprised if the staff read this in any way that would allow you to do a single-family house over 0.4 and then a single-family house at 0.45 and then do a last 0.5 as your 0.05 as your duplex to get there. I mean, I would anticipate that you guys would write the code in such a way that you couldn't do your single family over 0.4. You could only go over 0.4 to your 0.5 as a duplex, and that you wouldn't let any one side go over 0.4 because that would make the rule irrelevant, right? Does my question make sense?
Yes. So, Councilmember, we currently don't have anything related to duplexes that speaks to apportionment of square footage per side, but we could.
But it would make sense that that one side shouldn't be over 0.4 if we have a 0.4 cap on a single-family home.
I think that would make sense. We might have to write something in the code to clarify that, though, if this passes.
Right, you didn't have to have that before because you didn't have this differentiation. But once we create it, it would make sense.
Right.
To clarify that.
But that is the only way you could write it. If you got the direction that said FAR, if you're doing duplex, goes up to 0.5, but you also know that we want single-family homes not to go above 0.4, when you write code to let it go up to 0.5, you're going to have to write it in a way that meets both policy considerations. So duplex gets you up to 0.5, but we don't want single families to go over 0.4. So to Greg's point, I would think that if you got this, you would have to draft it that way.
I think that that's right, but the way, I just want to clarify, the way it's written today in the draft code, you can have a duplex product and you can apportion the square footage however you want to. So that FAR can be distributed in any way. So
we understand that under the code that's written now, but you weren't writing to this situation. So right. The only way for you to reconcile the two policy statements that would be given to you, one is don't let a single-family home go above the 0.4. We have that, or whatever that number is. If you have a duplexes, you can go to a total over 0.5. The question is, how much writing of this do we have to go through on the dais? Or can
Not-
we give you
not
this
much.
direction, and since you have the policies drafted in such a way that meets those two, as opposed to us now trying to draft it for you?
Right. I think what you've said here is clear. We understand what you're looking for.
Okay. Councilmember Kitchen.
I appreciate what you're saying, Mayor. I think we need to write that into this so that it's clear, not the specifics, but just adjust duplex FAR and then add a phrase to say what you just said, which is to consider language to address the apportionment of FAR and to set a maximum and to consider a maximum on the single-family home or something to that effect. But I think we need to write it in here because I don't think it's fair for staff for us to pass something and just, talk about what we think it means without actually putting some language for them, if that makes sense.
Okay, so we're protecting against the abuse, and the question is, how specific do we need to be?
Right.
We're trying to incentivize the building of duplexes. We don't want to have a 0.49 one side and a 0.01 on the other side. So to the degree you need direction. Councilmember Harper-Madison, is it okay to add to that without allowing a larger single-family unit size?
Than the 0.4.
Do you mind if I ask a question?
Uh-huh.
Is that necessary? Like, is that specific direction that you all would need?
I think if it was just so that any side of the duplex could not exceed what is allowed for a single family, that is clear. Then we know that either side should not be larger than what a single family would get.
Okay.
Are you okay with that?
Sure.
Okay. Any objection to that being added? Hearing none, that's added to this. Continuing discussion on Harper-Madison 1. Councilmember Alter.
So I can't speak to the current code situation, but if we have a duplex, we get 2 units. They don't have to be together. They could be separated. They have to be on the same lot. We also get this 400 of attic exemption, and we're modeling another 180 of square feet for stairway. That's 580 square feet. That's counted when you go to market. In places in my district, it's $400 per square foot. That's what they're getting for these duplexes. That adds up to a change of over $200,000 difference between doing a single family versus a duplex. That is a lot of incentive right there to do the other unit. So I think there's already built-in incentives in the way that we have the code for some of these areas where you're going to have plenty of incentive to do the duplexes in that way. The other thing is that I will guarantee you will have people who will build their single-family house, they will build a pool, and then they will call the other unit their pool house, and they will effectively have a single-family house that is larger than the 0.4. And that will happen. We have a huge demand in our city, and there are a lot of people with a lot of money who are coming in, and you will not have the impact that you think you're going to have from setting this up. I'm totally sympathetic to the notion of we want to find a way to incentivize duplexes over single family, but these loopholes will be exploited, and we already have baked in there because now you'll be able to separate your duplexes. We haven't seen that before. In being able to do that in a lot of parts of town. And you have these other exemptions on 580 square feet that gets used in the market analysis and is priced is over $200,000 in some of these areas where we're putting these duplexes. And so I would be much more comfortable with something about trying to consider a way to do this than actually following this particular specific direction.
Okay, Harper-Madison 1. Further discussion.
If I may, just respectfully recognizing that all our districts are different. Pool houses are not a D1 problem. Lack of housing supply is. And so I think we're at the point now where we're probably not going to come to consensus if we could just move forward.
Okay, any further discussion on Harper-Madison 1? Councilmember Kitchen?
I would just like to say one thing. I respect the fact that, and I'm glad that you said that not all of our districts are the same, because they're not. But we can do a code that works for the whole city if we take the time to actually consider something that drills down and addresses the concerns for different parts of the city. Because I don't think we're not disagreeing on the goals at all. I understand you would, but we're taking care of what's happening in your area of town without addressing what is happening in Councilmember Alter's area of town. Well, okay. I respect that you disagree. I would just ask that we take the time to consider and drill down to address the policy matters that we all agree on, and understand that it impacts different parts of town differently. I'm willing and interested, and I want to support additional duplexes, which I understand is important for a lot of the city, including District 1. I would just ask that you consider that the kinds of situation that Councilmember Alter is talking about is pretty important too. And it's not necessary to do one or the other.
Okay. I'm going to support this amendment as it's been proposed, but certainly, Councilmember Alter, if you can come up with a further amendment that addresses the situation that you have raised as a potential abuse, then please bring it back for consideration. Further discussion on Harper Madison 1. Yes.
I would like to amend it so that it's a 0.45 FAR instead of 5.
It's been moved to amend it to make it 0.45 FAR. Is there a second to that amendment? Councilmember Kitchen seconds that. Any discussion on going down to 0.45? Then let's take a vote. Those in favor of the amendment to take it to 0.45, please raise your hand. Kitchen, Alter, Poole, and Tovo. Those opposed? Balance of the dais. Harper Madison 1 is in front of us. Any further discussion?
Can you read it to us again? I'm sorry. Does it have the amendment?
Yes, it has the amendment that we agreed to. Okay, let's take a vote. Those in favor of it as amended, please raise your hand. Those opposed? Alter, Poole, and Tovo voting no. Councilmember Kitchen?
I'm abstaining, and I'm abstaining based on the point that I really would like to make, and I appreciate we all really need to address the concerns that we're seeing. I'm just asking people to listen and allow for the space to address the whole city. And so on this one, I feel torn, and so I'm going to abstain.
Okay. All right, that one passes. That gets us to Harper Madison number 2. Minimum lot size. Pulled by Alter Tovo. Discussion. Councilmember Alter.
Can staff speak to why you decided not to include this recommendation after draft 1? I think it's the general minimum lot size.
Sure, Brent Lloyd, LDC team. There were a handful of amendments, I think 10% or less of the first reading amendments that we found more challenging to implement than was initially apparent at first reading, and this was one of them. And I think part of the issue was that we read it as being sort of just broadly applicable to the overall lot size. And in working with Council Member Harper Madison's office, we've determined that its intent was actually really more focused on particular product types. And we believe, while there still are some issues that we need to work through, we believe that this is something that we can work with. And what we will likely be proposing in response is something that is targeted to particular use categories and not just a broad general reduction of the overall minimum lot size. I think we want to try to propose something that speaks to the council members' goals and is workable within the fabric of the overall zone. And so I think we will look to the townhouse regulations as a point of reference for that. And Greg, do you have anything to add?
Just that for the townhouse use, and really the council member can speak to this, I don't want to make any assumptions, but for the townhouse use, you get to use a townhouse site as if it were a lot, so that you get graduated FAR for the number of townhouse units that you have, and I think this would work the same way. So that if you imagine on an R2B lot, you get graduated FAR by unit. In this case, if you had a site that was divided into 3 lots, you would get that graduated FAR by lot in that same way.
You're dividing, I guess I'm not totally understanding the scope of this, because I think there's somewhere else where there's minimum lot size reductions generally too. So this one, I'm just not understanding what we're applying this for and how this works in practice. If you can go over that again, please.
I'll defer to the council member to explain it.
Smaller lots allow for smaller, more affordable homes is the intention.
And what I'm trying to understand is how this works in practice when you have said that it is difficult to do smaller lots within the construct in multiple responses to draft 1. And so it seems like there may be a particular scenario that you think you might have identified in the conversations where you can do this, but I'm not understanding how that plays out in practice in a specific example. I'm not totally familiar with how townhomes works currently. It's not something that we see frequently coming to council, so I'd like to understand better what we're talking about here.
Councilmember, we believe that as framed, we can work with this amendment. I think one of the challenges was with the initial amendment, and it might have been our misinterpreting it or not taking into account sort of the discussion that occurred on the dais at first reading, but I think we saw it, at least with respect to the missing middle R4 and RM1 zones, as being sort of against the goal of not facilitating new single-family homes, protecting the rights of existing ones and including a lot of protections for those, but not sort of incentivizing new ones and having smaller lots and facilitating more single-unit structures would kind of work at cross purposes with that. But this amendment is focused on the R2B zone. It references specifically the townhome regulations, and we think that we can work with this amendment and deliver something to the council that will further these goals and avoid some of the problems that we identified with the earlier attempt.
Councilmember Kassar and Councilmember Tovo.
I appreciate the smaller lot idea and voted for us to reduce the lot size in lots of areas in the May direction. On this, it's a tough one, but my sense is that I could support it only like we did on first reading in the missing middle zones. I think we've worked really hard, many folks here on the dais, to sort of explain how the smaller lot in the townhouse would work in transition zones in the missing middle zones, but have largely communicated to the public that in these R2 zones, additional units would be by ADU primarily or by preservation bonus as opposed to the townhouse use. And so I probably can't support this. Well, I can't support this one as written. I could support it if we were talking about the missing middle zones, which sounds a little bit more like what we were hearing from the staff. Not because I am against the idea, but because we've kind of gone down this long path trying to communicate and set expectations with the community, and generally the expectations have been set that the 1,400 square foot lot or 2,000 square foot lot townhouse use was going to be in the missing middle zones. So I can't support it as written here, but could support it in the missing middle area.
Councilmember Tovo.
I'm sorry, I just cannot get a read on what this amendment is directing, and especially if it worked around to be amended as Councilmember Kassar is suggesting. So if someone could please explain what precisely this is doing. I heard Mr. Dutton, you talked about the creation of 3 lots. I mean, is this assuming that R2B could be subdivided into 3 lots with a preservation house on one and the other 2 lots being smaller than the minimum lot size, and then townhomes on 2 of those 3? I just don't, it's entirely unclear to me it's really not clear to me what this direction entails.
If I may offer a little bit of clarity, the May 2nd policy direction that we had staff take into consideration it wasn't for the whole city. It was only current substandard lots. And so that's at least one part of the intention. But I'll read to you from staff wrote, all right, the policy direction document. It reads, we are seeing displacement now on large lot single family. We can't blame tomorrow's solutions for today's problems. By reducing the minimum lot size, we can reduce the one-to-one single family home replacement on large expensive lots, which guarantees the creation of $1 million single family homes in central Austin. And so in many ways, that was sort of the guiding principle, is how do we encourage more units on the lot as opposed to the one-to-one replacement, and specifically townhomes came up as a part. But I mean, I'll let them sort of speak to the technical, practical application of it.
So it's my understanding you can build on a substandard lot, and also that this code proposes a reduction to lot size over what we currently have in the existing code. So again, I just have to go back to my original question. Is the intent here, and maybe this is for you, Councilmember Harper-Madison, is the intent here to allow townhomes? Are you using townhome as an example, or are you proposing that townhomes be allowed on R2B lots?
Using the townhomes as an example for the purposes of getting at the scale. Ultimately, at the end of the day, the whole point of the direction and of the amendment is to use our limited urban space as efficiently as possible. Something I don't think we talk about enough during the course of these conversations around land use is climate reality and some of the other implications of us sprawling our city out and really looking to accomplish that tighter, more compact urban city center. And I think by way of offering people more opportunities, more flexibility. And I think this speaks to that.
So to just be very clear about what the entitlements are that you're proposing here, is it, I mean, I'm just looking over the site development regulations for townhomes, and it's about a 0.6 FAR, is that correct? I mean, are we proposing site development regulations that are currently envisioned for townhomes on R2B? And how would that vary, if the staff could tell us how that would vary from what is currently in the code? And then, Mr. Dutton, I do want to come around to the conversation you were having about 3 lots from 1 lot. So I guess, Councilmember Harper-Madison, the first
the
is
same
for
thing
you.
we did earlier, where you guys
Are you
start with the technical data,
Are you
and I'll
suggesting
circle back.
Are you suggesting site development regs for townhomes be applied to R2B?
Be better answered if you first let them talk about the technical component. If for no other reason, I think it's easier for the general public watching to follow if they get sort of the background, and then I move into what it is specifically I thought we needed to do in order to accomplish the goal.
Councilmember Tovo, the way we were thinking about this amendment was just that it would entail a reduced lot size for the zone. We currently have R2C, which is 3,500 square feet, and the other R2A and B are 5,000, so maybe somewhere in between there. But regarding the townhouse, I was simply pointing out, and maybe it was too much information, but that there are specific to use requirements for a townhouse that allow multiple townhouses on one site, that a townhouse site can be treated as one lot. And in that way, when you have multiple townhouses on a lot, they are able to take advantage of the graduated FAR, impervious cover. And so what we were thinking is that if we shrink the minimum lot size for this R2 zone, that similar provisions could apply for that zone.
So that would be a citywide change, because R2B has been mapped citywide. So citywide, if this passes, you would interpret that direction to be that R2B could be a smaller lot size. We currently have a provision that allows small lots to redevelop, which is R2C, right? But R2B, so if you had a lot that was, say, 7,000 square feet, you might be able to subdivide it into 2, and then do 3 units on each, getting 6 from where you could currently have maybe 2, possibly 1 in certain parts of town.
Sure. Yeah, the reduction in the minimum lot size just would mean that a lot that couldn't be subdivided today could possibly be subdivided tomorrow. if the minimum lot size is reduced.
So again, the parts of town I represent can primarily have 2 units per lot, but this would take tracts that can currently, in some areas of town, can currently have 1 unit, potentially 2, might be able to subdivide and have as many as 6 if they preserve the existing structures. And those other new structures could be townhomes, which have higher impervious cover because of the graduated approach.
Well, actually, so the first part of your question, yes, it would just depend on the lot size, whether or not they could subdivide. But the scaled impervious cover applies in the proposed code based on the units per lot. This just makes it equivalent if you've got multiple lots on a site. So each lot is treated as if it's a dwelling unit, and it gets the scaled impervious cover. It never allows the impervious cover to go over what's currently proposed. It just allows the entire site to take advantage of the graduated IC.
And that graduated IC would increase from what to what?
It wouldn't increase over what's being proposed in the R2 zones. It would stay 40, 45, 50, depending on how many dwelling units you have.
I see, but it would certainly, if you were able to subdivide, it would certainly increase the impervious cover looking collectively at the tract. Right, because it could allow you to subdivide
Well, it would
an R2B property into 2 and then hit the impervious cover on either tract.
It would still be, overall impervious cover would remain the same. If it's one lot with 3 units and it's a very large lot, it gets 50% for the entire lot. If you subdivide it into 2, 50% on each of those 2 resulting smaller lots.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Sure.
So I'm looking at this. All these questions are hard. My sense of this is we debated before making the lot size smaller. We came to a place that has enabled us to move forward. I understand going to smaller lot sizes throughout the city. I'm for that reason. I'm inclined to support your Harper Madison 3 amendment, which serves to do that. On this one, for me, given the collective kind of where we've been and where we've been operating kind of collectively, I'm going to vote no against this one, probably yes on 3, not because at some level I don't believe we should be making smaller lots, because I understand that policy, but more because I think that it's the right place for this document to go at this time in our city. So I'm going to vote no on this one. Any further discussion on this? Let's take a vote on the amendment. Those are Councilman Harper.
Just to be clear about, I mean, the only difference between R2B and C are one's suburban, one's urban, right? So it's setbacks and frontages. That's the difference. But I think I'm sorry, you clicked on.
Yeah, but the main difference is the minimum lot size.
And so I wanted to make sure to go on record as saying I also believe it's my understanding that the minimum lot size offers more opportunity for fee simple ownership, which is frankly better for owners. And so I just wanted to make certain to highlight that as well.
Sounds good. Let's take a vote. Those in favor of Harper Madison 2, please raise your hand. Harper Madison, Renteria, Flanagan, and Ellis. Those opposed. The balance of the dais, this one does not pass.
I'm abstaining.
Council and the Mayor Pro Tem abstains. Does not pass. The vote was 4 yes, 4 yes, 6 against, 1 abstention.
Mayor, can I get some clarity real quick? It's my understanding that R2A and B have the exact same lot size. Did I read something wrong there?
Yes, at this time, R2A and B have the exact same site development standards for lot size. The only difference between those 2 zones are in setbacks and private frontage requirements in R2B.
Okay, let's move then to concern number 1. I think Kitchen pulled this one. Councilmember Kitchen?
I have a question just about B. I don't have any concerns with the other ones. So if I could go straight to that.
Fine.
So I'm just trying to understand the amended plat process. And so you might start by, if council could, if staff could perhaps explain this process, and then Councilmember Kassar, if you could let us know what you're trying to accomplish with that.
Brent Lloyd, the amended plat process is instead of sort of submitting a new plat or a replat, which requires, a great deal of, can require engineering and a lot of submittal fees and preparation fees, surveying, you're simply changing and amending an existing plat. And state law includes limitations as to what you can do by amended plat, including, I think one of the paramount ones is you can't use it to remove deed restrictions. A lot of times, deed restrictions are referenced on the face of a plat, and you can't use the amended plat process to remove that. But one of the tools that's authorized under state law, it's not automatic. A city has to choose to adopt it, but cities can adopt a process by which amended plats can be used to actually create lots. And this does present some challenges, but we believe that with some creativity and having, the benefit of having looked at it previously, we think we can find a way to make it work. It would be something that potentially would not be available in all cases. There may be situations where, due to lot configurations or the need to dedicate easements or whatnot, it may not be a tool that every property is going to be able to utilize. But if council passes this amendment, we're committed to delivering some code language that we think would apply this process and make it available at least in certain situations.
Okay. What would it? So does it have any impact at all on how the ordinances related to impervious cover are applied, specifically the SOS ordinance and grandfathering? My understanding right now is that you couldn't if you went through a subdivision process, you couldn't use that process to you could not use that process to keep the it would be considered a new redevelopment, so you'd go back to the SOS limitations. So I just need to understand if using the amended plat process would change that in any way. And I may not be saying, I see Matt Holland back there, I may not be saying it correctly. So, but you may understand what I'm asking about. Okay. So I just want to make sure that.
Councilmember Kitchen, I think if Matt or Andrea wants to come up and speak, they're welcome to, but I will just respond from my perspective is that is an issue that we have not looked at, and it's a very legitimate issue to raise, and definitely one of the protections that's available in the SOS area is applied. The protections are applied through the subdivision process,
right?
And how this would relate to that, and whether whether we would need to fashion something different for the Barton Springs zone. I think those are all fair questions to raise, and I don't think we're prepared to answer those right now. At least I'm not. But we would certainly look at that if this amendment passes. We would look at how it would apply in the context of the Barton Springs zone.
Could Councilmember Kassar, would you be open to just adding a sentence that says, I don't know, something to the effect that this provision does not apply in circumstances where it impacts the SOS ordinances?
I think that the language that Mr. Lloyd mentioned, which is, consider if there need to be modifications to this in the Barton Springs zone versus not, is fine with me.
I'm sorry, ma'am.
Yeah, I'm happy to be as specific as we need to be, but since we don't actually know what the answer is, we don't actually know if there's a problem or not, I just want to give staff the flexibility to consider that.
My only point would be that I would want the language to be clear that we didn't want it, that we wanted to be sure that we were not impacting the SOS ordinance.
So it's just stated that way. This couldn't trump the SOS ordinance, which was
that's
passed.
really what I'm trying.
Is that correct?
That's correct, and I think the team, I've spoken with our watershed protection leadership and core team, and they they're committed, if this amendment passes, to making sure that we ensure that SOS level protections are available if the amended plat process is used. So this may require some creativity and some specific language, but it's something that we would be we would fold into the amendment, whether you guys specifically direct us to or not.
That's fine with me.
Okay, that language then is included. Further discussion. Councilmember Alter.
So can staff speak to Part A and why you recommended 30 years and not 15 years in your version of the preservation bonus? What are we losing if we go to 15 years from 30?
I think it's just less likely that the preserved structures will have naturally, organically become more market rate affordable.
So the point of the preservation bonus is to be preserving the stock that we have that's affordable at this point. And when you change that number of years, you're giving bonuses to less affordable lots. You're not really achieving your goal. Am I understanding that correctly?
We think, there are a lot of policy goals behind the preservation incentive, and I think the one that Greg touched on is one of them. But if it's council's desire in recognition of other policy goals to lower it to 15 years, we can work with that. I think I can't remember how the first reading amendment was worded, but it was something, I think, when it was initially passed that we felt were given the license to kind of make a recommendation on it. And we focused on the goal that Greg mentioned. But I think there are other goals in play as well. And so we are going to just defer entirely to council's wishes with respect to this. And if council wants to lower it to 15 years, it's certainly something that we could work with.
So I have problems with lowering this, and then you combine it with that. If you have the preserved unit, what is your FAR? You have no FAR limit, or you on your preserved
on the
house?
preserved unit, you're limited to the FAR in the zone.
Okay, so and then the other units that get built are what?
Also limited to the FAR that's prescribed by the zone.
So I could go, and let's say I have 0.4. Can you give me an example that I can work? I'm trying to understand what we're incentivizing now on houses that are relatively new, which are going to have a whole different economic structure. And again, I'm sorry, my frame of reference is my district, and these things will look really different.
So an example might be that the house that's preserved is limited to 0.4 FAR, and if they wanted to expand or add square footage, they could do so up to that point. And then the new unit, say they add one new unit in the back, that's another single-family house. That single-family house is also limited to 0.4. So it's almost as if each house exists on its own on the lot, irrespective of the other house.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't see this as a preservation tool for the affordable housing. It's being used to generate a lot of other units, and we've already created a lot of incentives to have 2 units on the lots, and again, we're getting a lot of big houses through that. So I'm not going to be able to support A. For B, I know that Councilmember Kitchen raised some issues, but I'm not totally understanding what you would do with what this says. Can you explain what this means to you in terms of what you would be doing in terms of simplifying the subdivision process by allowing the creation of lots through the amended plat process and reducing minimum lot sizes?
We would look at creating, utilizing a provision of state law that allows, if cities opt into it and there's some restrictions on it, again, you can't use it to remove deed restrictions. You can also have it be where you get a variance from a zoning regulation in order to do it. So there are some restrictions that we're very cognizant of. But if this amendment passes, we would work to find a way to incorporate the amended plat process into our regulations to try to facilitate, I think, broadly the intent of greater fee simple ownership, smaller lot sizes, but specifically in connection with preservation bonus, where a landowner is preserving a house, building an additional structure, and finding creative ways to allow the subdivision process to occur as simply as possible, and facilitate fee simple ownership. And I think I'm going to be totally candid. There are some issues we would have to work through. There are some challenges, and it may not be something that would work in every development type, but we think if this amendment passes that we can work with it and deliver a code provision that will further a lot of these objectives.
Okay. Any further? Go ahead.
I'll come back.
Councilmember Tovo.
I have a couple questions too. With regard to number 2, B2, is B2 intended to be the reduction of minimum lot sizes through the amended plat process, or is this a separate point?
The amended plat process would not have the effect of reducing the minimum lot sizes, so we would need to look kind of at the fabric of the regulations and determine how to reduce minimum lot sizes for particular product types. As we've indicated, not all of the new code utilizes, in a few instances, lot sizes that are tied to a particular development type as opposed to just being general throughout the zone. So I think we would need to be creative and find ways to tie lot sizes to particular development scenarios and then make the amended plat process available in those situations. And I think we're not going to be able to identify all the issues that have to be worked through, as part of this discussion. But I do think that if this amendment passes, we would be able to work through the issues and offer council something that, at least in certain circumstances, would allow this process to be used.
And then with regard to E, so the code as currently drafted does not allow the relocation of the preserved unit. And I would assume that relocating it adds to the costs. Do you think that's a reasonable assumption? That if you're utilizing the preservation incentive, part of which was to keep the costs down on that existing structure and maintain it as affordably priced as possible, I'm assuming relocating it adds to those costs considerably.
Yes, relocating the structure would add to the cost of the development.
And could you help me understand, or maybe the council member could, number D, letter D rather. What would be examples of structures that need amnesty COs? I mean, I would assume they all have a CO, otherwise they can't be occupied, right?
So just a little background on amnesty COs. Amnesty COs are authorized under current code, and they were adopted, I think, when the last code was adopted. So they're limited to structures that existed on a particular date in 84, 80. Remember, but basically what it says is that if you're a structure that existed on or before a particular date and it meets health and safety standards, it complies with technical codes, then it can receive a CO even if it doesn't meet all applicable site development standards. So in effect, an amnesty CO is a process by which older structures that have existed for a while that may not meet all site development standards, they may encroach into a setback, but they are safe, they're sound, there's a path forward to get COs. And my understanding of the intent behind this is that it would be to allow older structures that qualify for the amnesty CO process to not be prevented from using the preservation bonus process. I think that's what the intent of it is. And then one other point I'll just make is that we, in this code, and this was true in draft 3 as well, we've proposed an update to the amnesty CO process. We proposed some clarifications, some limitations to it. And additionally, we've moved the date from 1980 I forget whether it's 84 or 86, but we've moved that date to 2008. So under the new code, the amnesty CO process would be available for structures that existed 2008 or earlier, and again, they would have to meet a set of requirements.
But I didn't understand the preservation incentive as currently drafted to applying to only those structures that are up to current code. So it's not clear to me sort of what change D would affect.
I think I would need to reread the original language, but I think that the original language, the structure would have to be one that has a CO or is non-complying or legally non-complying, and I think that this would clarify that structures which are able to obtain amnesty COs but may have minor code violations would be eligible to participate. And again, I would have to go back and reread the original language, but I think that was not entirely clear in the initial version. And I can, if this item doesn't get resolved this afternoon or tonight, we can follow up with more information tomorrow. But
thank you.
Well, on that issue, can you confirm that was the intent?
Yeah. I'll hit all three of the issues quickly. I think that 15 years is better because there are, in talking to folks in the community about the preservation bonus, I think it's useful to different people for different reasons. So somebody who lives in a house that was built in the year 2000 and wants to have the ability to stay in place and add additional units and agrees to not tear down their front house, I think then their house eventually will be 30 years old, and instead of, and so I think bringing those folks in makes sense from bringing more people in to use the bonus. On the amnesty COs issue, the intent is to make sure that if somebody does own an older house and does want the ability to rent out another unit or sell a unit off the back of their property, that if they are in an older house that maybe the code enforcement says, hey, it doesn't have a health and safety issue, but because it's older and because things have changed over time, the porch goes into somebody's setback, I want that person to not have to go and rip off a side of their porch that's not unsafe, for example, in order to participate in the program. I want folks whose house meets health and safety standards to have the greatest ability to participate if they choose to. And the smaller lots issue, I think here creates the opportunity, as Councilmember Harper-Madison mentioned in the last amendment, for more simple ownership where someone might have a wide lot and do the preservation bonus, keep their house, add a couple of units on the side, and have an easier opportunity, even if they don't live on a really big lot, to sell those and stay and sort of be able to capitalize on that asset and stay in place. And so that's the intention behind each of these.
And if I can just clarify just very briefly, what could happen, Councilmember Tovo, to your question, just to be a little bit more concrete in the explanation, is somebody comes in to do the preservation incentive and the house that they want to preserve has some illegal additions. It has some construction that's been done that wasn't properly permitted, and maybe it does not fully comply with current code. This would simply say that if that can be permitted through the amnesty CO process, which has some limitations to it, it's not unlimited, then it would be eligible for participation in the preservation incentive.
Okay. For me, I'm going to support the amendment as we move forward, and I recognize that moving a house costs more than not moving a house. But by moving the house, you might actually save some expenses too. You may be able to put in driveways that cost less or are of decreased distance. You might be able to save trees and avoid the cost of mitigation. So it could result in a cost savings as well.
Preservation Austn, I think, suggested being able to move the house further to the front.
Yeah, for those reasons, I think. Yes, Councilor Alice.
I have what I hope is a quick clarification question on Part E about being able to move the unit on the property but not away from the front street. How would this affect on a corner lot? I just want to make sure if staff needs more direction on you can move it away from the side street.
Here, that's why we specifically spoke to street frontage rather than the front address of the house.
Okay.
So that the house isn't hidden away from the street but moves towards either street frontage.
Okay, just wanted to make sure, so I'm glad that we had this chat.
Councilmember Tovo.
Okay, thank you for talking through D. I now understand that, and I'm comfortable with that. I want to talk about the FAR and get back to that for a minute, because I'm looking back at the text, and it's my understanding the preserved structure doesn't count toward the maximum allowable FAR in the base zone.
That is correct. The structure that's preserved does not count towards the FAR of the site any longer, but it is still capped at the FAR that would be allowed by the site. So it can't be expanded beyond the 0.4 FAR.
But if subdivided, the additional 2 lots would actually be subject to the graduated approach and be allowed additional FAR for having multiple units. I'm looking through the text. Additional units are not subject to minimum parking requirements. And within R2A, R2B, R3 development can't exceed a maximum impervious cover of 45% if it contains 2 units, 50 if the site contains 3, 55 if the site contains 4 units. So I'm trying to go back. I'm trying to understand how that graduated approach works, or if it's a moot point if the lot is subdivided as I assumed is contemplated by B.
I think since both structures, preserved and the new, are limited to the FAR in the zone, if it was subdivided, if the lot was subdivided subsequently, then they would be they might be at their limit for the zone, but they wouldn't be over what would otherwise be allowed in the zone.
I guess I'm trying to understand how. So, and you're talking about the second unit, but it's my understanding if you're in R2B, you could actually achieve 3 if you preserve the existing structure. Mm-hmm. So if you have a site and you utilize the preservation incentive and build 3 units, you can achieve that higher impervious cover through the graduated approach. You could achieve 50%, and then you could subdivide, and then those lots would have potentially more on their lot than would have otherwise been permitted.
Well, in that case, if you had one lot with 3 units and 50% impervious cover, and then you subdivided that lot, assuming one of the units went with one lot and 2 went with another, the total impervious cover on each one of those resulting smaller lots, I can't imagine. I'm trying to imagine it being at 50% or between 45 and 50, which I think. Are you saying that you think it would have higher impervious cover than would otherwise be allowed?
Yeah, I think so, because each of those lots individually would have exceeded the impervious cover that would be allowed with one lot per house, one house per lot.
So in the subdivision, if you did the preservation incentive and you had 3 units and 50% impervious cover, and then you subdivided after that, the lot that had the one house might have more impervious cover than would be typically allowed for 1 unit. That's something that we're going to need to work with our watershed team on, about how subdivision post-preservation incentive would work, and how that can be monitored. But the site itself would not exceed the impervious cover allowance for those 3 units. So as a total, the 50% would be maintained, which is allowed, but per lot, one lot might exceed the impervious cover that would typically be allowed for that number of units. So that's just a logistical thing that will need to be worked out with our watershed team.
Okay, yeah, I look forward to hearing more about how that's going to be worked out. And I think I'm in the same position that I was in last time, which is there are other amendments that seem to speak to minimum lot size, and it's not entirely clear how those are going to interact in such a way as to potentially impact this one. But anyway, if you don't mind following back up on that once you have some more info from Watershed.
Okay, Casar number 1 is in front of us. We ready to take a vote? Councilmember Alter.
I'm going to just make it easy and just vote no on all of it. There's C and E that I would probably support, but I'll just make it simple.
Okay. Councilmember Kitchen.
I want to confirm the language we're adding to B. I would suggest we just add a number 3 that says, ensure that SOS protections remain applicable.
Any objection to that? Hearing none, that's added. Let's take a vote on CASAR 1. Those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed? Alder voting no. Those abstaining?
I'm not abstaining. I'm going to support the provisions with the, I'm not going to make it easy, I guess. Sorry about that. But I am going to support all of them except for B.
Okay, record will so note. Councilmember Poole? Councilmember Poole's a no. Alter's a no. Tovo is both no and yes, as she indicated in the record. The others voting aye. CASAR 1 passes. What about Tovo 4?
Mayor, I thought we had a hard stop at 5.
Okay, we could either stop at 5. I'm going to come back toward the end with Adler RS1. So I'm going to table that one for right now to bring back when I have language, which means we only have this one thing remaining in residential. Do we want to try and take care of the one thing we have left in residential? Okay. Seems like most people are shaking their head yes. Let's see how long this is going to take. Do it quick. Tovo number 4. Harper Madison and Cassar pulled this one.
Mayor Adler, I'm sorry. I only got childcare till 5, so I'm already late as it stands. I really need to get going.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we should stick to the times we set.
Let's go ahead and stick to the time. Colleagues, we don't start tomorrow until 3. Let's see if we can start really promptly at 3. I would urge people, if you have amendments, make sure that you post them. I've handed out an amendment to Kitchen 1, which is at the bottom of page 2. Also posted it, so that one's there. But if you have anything, pass them out. If anybody can pass out new amendments or post them, we'll try to create a tranche 2 packet. Because, again, we're going to go through first all the ones that were filed, last Friday and the amendments there, too. But we will start pulling together a tranche 2 packet if people will go ahead and post those. Councilmember Kitchen?
Remind us all of the schedule for tomorrow.
Yes.
Because we have a start time, we have an end time, and I think we have a break in the middle, but I'm not sure. So if you
We're going to start at 3 o'clock. We're going to go to 5. We're going to take a dinner break between 5 and 7:30. We're going to reconvene at 7:30. I've suggested people try to be available through like 11.
Okay.
And we'll work as fast as we can. Again, if people can post stuff, preferably by noon tomorrow, we'll try to prepare and hand out a tranche 2 packet. So post new amendments for the tranche 2 packet, post amendments to these amendments so that people can look at them ahead of time. Anything before we break? Yes, Councilmember Poole?
And maybe we can get some time tomorrow, too, to talk about the capacity numbers that we got from staff.
Okay. With that, here at 5:14, this meeting is adjourned.